I'm Tim Van Orden, runningraw.com. I was a vegan from 1998 until 2004 and had come down with some pretty serious health issues. Even though going vegan really transformed my experience of health, I was kind of a junk food vegan. So after quite a few years of eating that way, my health kind of fell apart. And some people that were really concerned about me suggested that I try a raw diet, and I thought that was just nuts. You know, what do you eat? Greens and fruit and twigs, and it just didn't sound very appealing, but I was in such bad shape emotionally and physically that it was worth trying. I thought I'd give it a try maybe for a week, and it worked. You know, I expected it to fail. I didn't really believe what they were telling me, that I was going to have this magical curative experience. So I thought I'll give it a try for a week. I'm sure it won't work, and then I'll just go back to eating what I want to. But it worked. In a week I started to feel really good. And then 2 weeks I felt better, a month I felt better, and I just kept going. And after a year of being raw, I had so much energy and felt so good that I started running and developed the Running Raw project. Well, I was an athlete from probably the age of 14 to 19, and I was decent. I wasn't great, but I was a decent athlete. And then somewhere late in my 19th year, I retired from athletics. I quit, like most people do. You go through high school, maybe a little bit of college, and then you stop playing games. So from late 19 to about 37, I didn't do anything, or at least very little. I didn't do any kind of training. So after being raw for a year, I felt like I was 18 again, and I was 37. So I started running. So I really had a huge gap of no activity. And eating a raw diet brought this feeling of youth back into me. So then I started training and competing and have improved ever since. And now at 45, I'm much faster as a runner than I was at 18 or 19, which just shouldn't happen. You know, most people think that's your peak fitness back in your late teens and early 20s, but I'm much fitter now. So when I started running, a lot of it was curiosity. You know, is this energy real? Because you have all these people in the raw food world talking about energy, but how do you translate that into a real world experience? So I wanted a metric, some way to measure it, and I thought running was a great way to measure it. You know, you can look at the times and you can compare them to yourself at different ages, you can compare them to other people, and it's a great way to see, is this energy real or is it just in my head? And I learned pretty quickly that it was real, so that excited me to train more and harder. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could make an Olympic team at 40 as a raw vegan and really punch it out there that this diet is pretty extraordinary. And that didn't happen. I didn't make an Olympic team. 2 years or 2.5 years just wasn't enough time to train and prepare, and I didn't know what I was doing. I just kind of stumbled into it. But you feel invincible when you're on a raw diet. You have so much energy, you think you can do anything. And that's not true. You can do a lot, but you can't do anything or everything. But I kept at it, even though I fell on my face a lot. And in 2010, after running for about 4 years, I won my first U.S. championship in trail running, 15 kilometer in Washington, state of Washington. And that just blew my mind. It was a dream come true, and I didn't, you know, I hoped it would happen, but when it actually did happen, it kind of shattered my own belief system. And that just egged me on to try even harder and do more. And at this point, I've won 10 U.S. trail running championships, from 10K, 15K, half marathon, marathon, and 50K. I've got a gold medal in each. And I've won U.S. mountain running championships. I've won I was the top American at the Empire State Building, which is the World Stair Climbing Championships. 190 of the fittest, craziest people on earth running up the staircase of the Empire State Building. And I got 4th in the world there, and I was over 40, so that's a pretty good endorsement for a raw vegan diet. And Running Raw just keeps expanding. My results keep getting better, I keep getting fitter. And like I said, I'm 45 now, and I don't see myself slowing down. So, and I wear this when I race, Running Raw, to let everybody know what I'm doing. In the back of the shirt, powered by raw food. So anybody who happens to be behind me is going to see that the whole time that they're running. But also at the same time, when I started the project, I was kind of a cheerleader. You know, look, raw food, veganism, look what it can do, look what it can do. You're all doing it wrong. I could make you better. I could help you. And nobody wanted to be my friend. Nobody wanted to listen. I was the crazy raw guy. And they just, oh, he's here. Huh. And people would, you know, look away whenever I walked near them. But then I realized that it's not about beating people. It's not about dominating people. What I really wanted to show was there's this whole level of possibility that most people aren't even aware exists. And if you don't speak with your words, you speak with your actions, you'll get a lot more respect. So I've learned to speak with my actions rather than my voice. So I still wear the shirt, but I don't go over to people and just start talking to them. I let them come to me now. And I'm not there to beat anyone. I'm not there to win. I'm simply there to be the best person I can be and to just grow as a human being, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever you want to call it. And I've taken a much more compassionate approach to it. Vegans are supposed to be compassionate people. That's why we don't eat animal products for the most part. But I see a lot of vegans who are very angry and militant and judgmental, and that's not very compassionate. So I was one of those people as well. And now I've taken it upon myself to be compassionate with the people around me that are making different choices than I am. If I can't be compassionate with them, then I'm not truly compassionate. So my competition is not about beating them or proving them wrong or demonstrating that they're inferior to me, the superior righteous vegan. It's simply about showing them that there's more room to grow. There's a whole nother level that maybe they haven't seen yet. And wearing the shirt and just being there and being friendly and not running around, you know, handing out vegan literature, I've had a much greater impact and I've reached more people. Because now they respect me as a human being and they don't label me anymore. But they want to do what I do. So they're like, you know, you've really gotten good and we see you improving all the time. So tell me about this stuff you're eating. What is it? You know, I thought you were nuts at first, but I get it now, so. And I let them come to me. And I welcome them. And, you know, there is no first place or last place when I race. We're all equal in my eyes. You know, and I talk to everybody in the race, no matter where they're placed. So it's become a much more compassionate journey for me that way. There are some foundational books that got a lot of people into the raw food movement, and primarily because of enzymes. Like that's the reason that most people go raw, because when you cook food, you denature the enzymes in the food. But from a scientific basis, that's not really valid. Yes, you do denature the enzymes, but so does the hydrochloric acid in your stomach. So regardless, cooked or not, the same thing happens to it. But the problem with cooking most foods is that you're going to produce some really toxic compounds, and you're going to make some nutrients unavailable. So, for instance, when you cook carbohydrates at high temperatures, you can produce acrylamide, which is almost like a plastic, and it's a probable carcinogen, meaning that there's a good chance that it causes cancer. You also produce advanced glycation end products, which is where the sugars and the proteins bind with each other under high temperatures. And this is the brown that you see on bread. It's when coffee beans, when you roast them and they turn brown. When you bake cookies and they go from like a light tan and they get nice and golden brown. That browning is the formation of these advanced glycation end products. It's called caramelization. And that caramelization process is very toxic. So, advanced glycation end products, they've been shown to promote Alzheimer's disease. They damage the cell walls of your arteries. They can lead to heart disease. They can do a whole host of damaging things in the body. And then you also have cooked proteins. There's things called heterocyclic amines, which are highly toxic. There are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are really toxic. When you cook fats, you produce lipid peroxides, which are really bad because they damage your cell membranes, they get in and they attack your DNA and they damage your DNA. And once your DNA is damaged, you can't properly replicate the cells, and that can lead to cancer. There's a whole host of things. Even protein, I was talking about protein in a talk I gave today. When you heat proteins, you damage a lot of the amino acids. So they're not only unavailable, but they can become toxic. So people that are consuming massive amounts of protein supplements and cooked proteins and cooked meats and whatnot, they're not getting the protein that they think they're getting. They'll look at a vegan and say, oh, you're not getting enough protein. And it's like, well, I only need this much. You're eating this much, but you're only really getting this much out of it, so we're eating about the same amount. But they're not aware of that. And the proteins that I'm eating are less toxic. There's less of the sulfur backbone amino acids in plant proteins, and the high sulfur content in animal proteins can lead to an acidic effect. They're harder on the kidneys. It can lead to more uric acid production. So there are just so many reasons not to cook most of your foods. Steaming, if you lightly steam things, you're not producing anything harmful. If you boil things for a little bit of time, you're not producing anything harmful. But for the most part, eat fresh whole foods, and you're going to significantly reduce the toxic load that you're putting into your body. Because the air is toxic, we have so many electronic signals running around, our shampoos and conditioners and deodorants and the plastics we wear and the smell inside of our car. There's so much toxicity in our environment already that if you have toxic food as well, you're just bound to come down with some terrible disease. And everybody does. So if you can cut that toxic load at least in half or more by changing your diet, you're going to see, a greater experience of health. Something happens when you switch to a raw vegan diet. You wake up, in a sense. I've dealt with depression for most of my life, and when I switched to the diet, suddenly I had this mental clarity. It was like a huge fog had been lifted. I was just bouncing off the walls. I had never experienced anything like that before. In fact, even going vegan, I was an insomniac, and then when I went vegan, I started sleeping. And that was brand new to me because I hadn't slept in a very long, more than 10, 12 years. And now here I am sleeping. And so many different things have happened, not just to my body, but to my mind and my experience of being me. But that also comes with some caveats. Because you're more awake, you're more observant, you're more aware of things, you take more in from the world around you, and that can be hard because we live in a harsh world. There's a lot of beauty in this world, and there's a lot of love, but there's also a lot of hate, and there's a lot of crime, and there's a lot of injustice. And it's harder to bury your head in the sand when your mind is functioning better. And I found that to be a real challenge. So if on a large scale we had more people going to a vegan diet or a raw diet, we're going to have a lot of awakenings. And you're going to have a lot of really uncomfortable people because it's frightening at first. And I've been talking to people here at the festival about that awakening experience and how scary it is because, first of all, you feel different than you used to feel, but you also feel different now than the people around you. And you notice the fogginess, and you notice the sluggishness, and you can see the numb on these people, and you're just ready to go, and they're just numb. So it's also about teaching people to be comfortable with uncertainty. Most people want certainty in their life. I vote Republican, I drive this car, I do this, I do that, I know who I am. And whether they're right or not, they're certain about it and they take comfort in that. They don't like looking under the rug and seeing what's there. But when you switch this diet, suddenly there's this massive, shift. And you have to start looking at things. And that's really uncomfortable. So a lot of what I do now is showing people how to emotionally transition. It used to be I showed them, here's the food that you eat and here's how you exercise. I'm running raw, and that's people still introduce me as the raw runner. But mostly what I do now is help people emotionally transition, help them deal with that phase change in their consciousness, in their mind. Because it can be scary. And you can feel alone, isolated, alienated. until you come to something like the Woodstock Fruit Festival, and then suddenly you're around people that are doing what you're doing and having the same experience. It's like, but then you go back home again. And suddenly you feel like an alien. So by helping people transition, my goal is to write books and make videos and get as many people ready to make that transition. Because we can give you all the dietary information that there is, you know, we can give you all the numbers and all the foods, but if you're not emotionally ready to take that step, it's not going to stick. So to transition a large portion of the population, there'll be a chaotic, you know, sea change there. There'll be a moment of where everything's a little bit off balance, because you're going to have people that are like, I can't work at this job anymore because I'm awake now, I'm not numb anymore. You know, most people numb themselves out and sit at the desk and do their job, and they've got the soda and they've got the burger and they've got the pizza and they've got the coffee, and it just numbs them down so they can get through the day at work. So they don't have to think, so they don't have to feel. But now suddenly if they're operating at 100%, it's harder to sit at that desk. So it's not going to be an easy transition. You know, it would be a big shake-up in society if, you know, a large portion of us went vegan and raw. But I'd love to see it. It'd be a fascinating experience, because I think things need to be shaken up a bit. One of the great things about coming to an event like the Woodstock Fruit Festival, you get to meet extraordinary people from all over the world who've come here to present their knowledge in relation to fruit and a better experience of life. And I've had the good fortune of rooming with Tony Wright the previous 2 years, and this year we're staying in rooms across from each other. But we've had really profound conversations about the mind and evolution. And as a runner, I spend a lot of time in the woods running. In fact, 95% of my runs are just in the wilds of Vermont, hours in the woods. And I've found that the experience of running through the forest is dramatically different than the experience of running on the road. You could say, well, it's prettier in the forest, but I've run down some very pretty roads that don't have the same effect on me. So I started doing some research into the experience that plants have on our moods and on our experience. And there's some studies done in Japan that showed that people who go for walks every day in the forest have better health, mentally and physically. That these plants, they're actually chemicals from the plants in the air that have a positive effect on the human psyche and the human body. That these plants are actually helping to regulate our experience. And Tony's data, and what Tony's looking at, is the origin of the human species, you know, being symbiotically evolved or co-evolving with plants in the jungle, these flowering plants, these fruiting plants that were producing all these chemicals that were playing the strings of the human instrument. We think the answer has been solved when we break the human genome. Like we understand humanity now, we've cracked the human genome. It's like, no, we've just begun. Because that human genome, that DNA, can be played like an instrument. The study of epigenetics has evolved since the breaking of the human genome, because we realized that, okay, we understand the genes and how they're sequenced, but we really don't know how they work. And that's where epigenetics comes in. And that's the effect of outside forces, outside chemicals on the expression of those genes. And it turns out that plants produce many different kinds of beneficial chemicals that play our instrument in a very cool way. So when I'm running through the forest, those plants are actually playing me as an instrument, and I get to experience that. And when Tony talks about eating fruits in the jungle, tropical fruits that we co-evolved with, and those fruits having a psychoactive effect on us, regulating the experience that we have, balancing our brain hemispheres, it's extraordinary what is possible, the experience of being alive that's possible in that type of environment. So this is something that I'm fascinated about, and Tony and I speak for hours every night here just about the new possibility and the new research in that area. So he's definitely one of my favorite people here at the festival. My website is runningraw.com, and I have all of my results listed for people that want to see what I've actually done. I also have a YouTube channel, which is Running Raw, and I'll be coming out with a new website and YouTube channel called Compassionate Competition, which is where I remove the raw label and the vegan label, and it's just about being compassionate, meaning to suffer together, from Latin com patere. And then you've got competition. Actually, competition is compatere. Compassion is compati. So suffering together and striving together. That's what compassionate competition means. Striving towards a goal together while suffering. And that sounds crazy, but that's what sport is. People out there pushing themselves, challenging their limits. And I think that can be a very positive thing, because together, everyone achieves more. Team. It's an acronym. So when we can push each other, not to beat or dominate, but to rise up, to challenge each other to become better than the person that we are or have been, the whole world benefits. So compassionate competition, about getting people together. We'll talk about plant-based stuff, but I won't use the word raw or vegan, so it's accessible to a larger audience. And hopefully that has a big impact. Anybody that watches my videos will see that I'm a big fan of etymology, which is the root of words. Words are simply containers, and we fill them with meaning. They're just an empty vessel. So the word itself really doesn't have much meaning. It's what we put into it. But I like to look at how was that container formed to begin with? Because the person that formed that container had a very specific intention, and I think there's a lot of power in going back to the original root of the word. People often come up to me and say, you know, you inspire me, or you're really inspiring, and I always look at them and say, well, that's not my intention. Because if you look at the word inspiration or inspire, it comes from the Latin inspirare, which means to breathe into. And the problem with breathing into someone is, first of all, it's really creepy, you know, if I walked up and just breathed into you, if I inspired you. But secondly, the person can breathe out. You know, I breathe in, you breathe out. You're like, oh, that was interesting. All gone, back to normal, go back to my life, do my own thing. So inspiring people doesn't last. But I want to build something in there, inside of them, that lasts. I want to build something that doesn't go away, something they can't just breathe out. So I want to inflame people. I want to create a burning ember in there that smolders and eventually catches fire and creates so much heat under their butt that it forces them to stand up and take action. Whereas inspiration just comes and goes, like the day and the night. But inflammation, if I can get people to feel something, if I can get them to be uncomfortable, to see that the current choices they're making right now are really uncomfortable and that they don't like their life, if I can point that out and start that fire, they'll change. But if I allow them to be comfortable and pretend that everything is great, yeah, everything is great, everything is great, oh, that was inspiring, everything is great, yeah, I'm pretending everything is great, nothing has changed. I want them to see their own truth and realize that they don't like it, because they wouldn't be coming to my talk if they really did like it. If they were already content, they wouldn't need me, they wouldn't need any of the speakers and presenters here. They would already have everything they need, but they're in my audience, which tells me there's something missing. So I'm going to nudge them until it lights up, create that spark. That's my goal.